Welcome to A Lit Passage, one book. Readers discussing one book in their lives. If you're new to the channel, please remember to subscribe. Your support really helps our channel grow. We're a new channel and we really appreciate your support and engagement. It's late night in Izmir, noontime in Los Angeles, and I'm thrilled to be joined by Dr. Stephan Hoeller to discuss J.R.R. Tolkien's masterwork, The Lord of the Rings. Dr. Hoeller has been an influential scholar, writer, and lecturer for decades, especially in matters of religion, esoteric practices, and Gnosticism. He is widely recognized for such books as The Gnostic Jung and Gnosticism, New Light on the Ancient Tradition of Inner Knowing, which, Dr. Hoeller, by the way, that book that I just mentioned will be on this series because it was one book that did shape and still does shape my life. But over
I am honored.
Yeah, well, I'll have to bring you back on. Maybe we could do that with your own book. That would be interesting. We have the author on.
Well, at least I can add a few words to it.
Exactly, a postscript. So over the decades, in addition to his publications in book form and the many articles, Dr. Hoeller has literally given thousands of lectures, many of which are available on YouTube and on the wonderful Ecclesia Gnostic website. And we will link that below in the description. Dr. Hoeller, thank you so much for taking some time during these gray pandemic days to talk about the Lord of the Rings in our lives. I really appreciate you sparing some time for us.
Well, you are most welcome.
Well, it's been 90 years or so since Professor Tolkien scribbled on a blank page in an exam booklet that one of his students had turned in at Oxford.
Oh, yes.
And he scribbled the sentence, "In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit." And that sentence led to a tremendous outpouring of creativity that extended through multiple works.
And
the
he
creation
had,
of
at the moment, he had no idea what a hobbit is supposed to be.
Yes, and it was, and when you think of not only all the works that poured through him in terms of like Lord of the Rings, which we'll talk about, but all of the tangential works and the histories and the languages. But then beyond that, you have the illustrator tradition and then the films and so much scholarship written about it. And ultimately your lectures that you've done on Tolkien that are amazing on good and evil in Tolkien, character analysis, Gnostic themes. And I guess you could say, including this conversation, all of that has stemmed from that strange sentence that launched Tolkien on this quest to figure out what is a hobbit. And, you know, I remember in 2000, there were all these polls, and Tolkien in one poll came up as author of the 20th century. So before this talk, I looked up, just Googled some novel rankings, and this is now 2020, and Lord of the Rings comes up on number 2, you know, ahead of Anna Karenina even. So I just want to start. We don't have much time, and we could do this probably 10 episodes just on the Lord of the Rings. But I just want to jump in there and say, why does it speak to us so much, and maybe to you specifically? Let's just start and get right to the core.
Well, off the top of my head, as it were, I would say probably at least two things that are very important, and that impress, let's say, what has been sometimes called the virgin mind, which is maybe too sexual a statement, but let's say the mind that is not indoctrinated by anything. And one of these is that the Lord of the Rings, with all of its accompanying works, is a myth. It is a great myth, and I think it could justly be called the myth or the monomyth of the 20th and the 21st century. It is certainly comparable to, if not indeed surpassing, the myth of the Grail and their various combinations, including, let's say, the myth of Merlin and so forth. These were great myths that continued to interest people for hundreds of years, and I think so is Tolkien. This is myth of tremendous magnitude. And for that, we need to remember that there are certain kinds of insights in life that can be best expressed mythically, and they don't lend themselves to a factual statement, they don't lend themselves to an emotional statement, mythic statement, so that is undoubtedly one. And the second is that, like many other myth makers before him, Tolkien's writing is visionary writing. And there's a great deal of evidence indicating that the story about the doodle about the Hobbit is just one little episode there. But as soon as he came back from the Battle of the Somme, he was having visions, more simple ones, and they led to the tremendous mythical visionary world of Middle Earth and all that goes with it. So we are dealing with visionary literature, and we are dealing with a gigantic, all-encompassing myth. And these are very important factors in the history of the world.
Yeah, it's really interesting how you mentioned myth of the 20th century, because I was thinking, among many things that the book is, it's really a navigation or an exploration of what it is to be heroic. And when you think, often they speak in the millennia of heroic representations, extending back to, let's say, Homer. You have the warrior, and then with Socrates, you have him overthrown as kind of the saint or the salvific figure. And those seem to go on until you mentioned, King Arthur was that first kind of complex examination of all these different heroic figures together in this story cycle. And Tolkien seems to me to take that to a new level in terms of examining what it means to be heroic in life's difficulties. Every character seems to be an essay on failed or attempted or burgeoning heroism.
Related to heroism in one way or the other. Even Saruman is a failed hero.
Right.
No doubt. And I think at least I have a sort of feeling, a suspicion that this heroic emphasis in Tolkien really also originates in the deeper insight in his visionary sources of knowledge. Because the kind of world we live in, whether we call it Middle Earth or anything else, really requires heroic virtue to deal with it. If we are not heroes, we are going to be defeated in this world. And many of us are, and let's hope that we are not. But so the heroic quality is extremely important, there's an interesting parallel there to the concept of sainthood, saying in hagiology, Catholic hagiology, that a saint is someone who exercised virtue in a heroic fashion. And of course, the hero is the first step toward deification, to apotheosis in the Greek system. First you are a hero, then you are a demigod, and then you are a god or a goddess. So the heroic element is a very, very important one traditionally, and Tolkien definitely caught on to it and exercised it to a very, very high degree.
And it's interesting in the theme of the catalog of heroes, failed heroes, potential heroes, uncertain heroes that we encounter in the work. It seems to connect with readers at different times. And what fascinates me about the book is that in the one sense, it's almost like wisdom literature with these eternal truths, where, let's say, Gandalf might say, there's the famous line where he's talking to Pip at the Siege of Gondor, and Pip says something to the effect of, I wish I didn't have to live during these times. Or no, it's not the Siege of Gondor. I think it's talking to Frodo in the mines of Mordor. And
Moria.
Yeah, Moria. Yes, thank you. And Frodo says, I wish I didn't have to have this burden, or I wish I wasn't living during this time. And he says, so do all people, but all we have to decide is what we do with the time that we have. And this seems to be an eternal truth, like wisdom literature that can apply any time in your life. But then there's this other in-the-world aspect with depending on your age, depending on what you're maybe going through in your life, that you notice different things in these characters that really apply to you in these catalog of heroes. So I was curious about how that plays in your life in the sense of maybe different times you were reading it, if you notice this intersection between what you could call eternal wisdom that you encounter all the time, or at certain times different characters or different elements jump out to you depending on what you've been through as you've read it for over many decades and lectured on it and written about it.
Yes, of course. Let's say in a very true and very profound sense, it might be said that any literature that truly speaks to you in a powerful and deep fashion touches principles, character developments, traits of character within yourself. And it automatically relates to your inner being. So all literature has a strong depth psychological aspect. And so depending on the time of our lives when we are reading The Lord of the Rings, and I have read the Lord of the Rings plus The Hobbit about 9 times so far, from cover to cover, there are different themes that jump out from that which seem to have a relevance to our lives at a particular time when we are reading or shortly thereafter. So there is an interplay between the imaginal world that Tolkien paints and the interior world within us. In fact, it may be that literature like Tolkien's is able to bring forth from within ourselves in an imaginal fashion, in a magical fashion, various important elements that are there but that have not risen to consciousness. So there's an important process going on when you read and perhaps study these works.
Right. I mean, I think Tolkien, people are always trying to pin down the series as just like it's often seen as it's just a biographical reflection of his time in World War I, or it's just a allegory of Nazi fascism, but Tolkien himself resisted that and used that interesting term applicability, where it's something that's fluid that you can apply, as you're talking about, to your life. It's not. It resists this one definition or.
That sort of limiting, which then,
right.
And I think Tolkien used that term, that reduces his work to allegory, and he did not like allegory.
Right.
In a sort of Jungian sense, we might say it's full of symbols, but not allegory.
Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned that great story cycle of the Grail, because I've always been impressed with how Lord of the Rings is a quest to get rid of something, as opposed to attain something.
The acquisition, yeah. Well. It's perhaps the same quest, but with a different prefix.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, yeah.
No, go ahead.
No, I meant in a sense it might be said that it impels us perhaps to reflect consciously or unconsciously on the need to get rid of something that we are carrying ourselves.
Yeah.
We are all carrying the ring, and we all got to get rid of it. But
right.
interestingly enough, it is the little hobbits, the little ordinary people, so to say, the prosaic little people who enjoy good food and enjoy their pipe weed, which should not be forgotten about it. They are the ones who, not the great heroes, not Aragorn, not even Gandalf,
right?
But these little people who managed to get rid of the baneful ring.
Right.
And so that should give us a little courage that the ring that we are carrying, we can get rid of it, because even though we may see ourselves as little ordinary people, we do have that capacity within us to ultimately to be the hero who drops the ring into the fiery volcano.
Right, and endures such a long adventure to do it.
It's to sweat bloody tears to read that chapter.
Yeah, and you
when
think
they're
of
climbing up Mount Doom.
Yeah, and you think of, I think the movie captured this really well, of just the brutality of once they're in Mordor, and having to now after all this they've gone through, they have to actually walk across this just hellscape to do the final work. But it's interesting in terms of what you were saying about how not only are they the ordinary folk who enjoy comfort like all of us do, but they're also the one they're also overlooked by Sauron. He would never think that they were capable of that.
They had a wise policy from way back to hide out in the Shire and don't make any noise.
Right.
To stay off. And of course Gandalf and various people were helping them to remain concealed.
Yeah,
that is also very important.
Right.
Don't arrest the attention of the enemy, because then he'll get you.
and also the dark forces, whatever they may be, don't expect it from you as well, which is also interesting. Even they overlook the courage and the fortitude that is so chronicled in that tale.
Because they say these are just prosaic little people,
right?
But the potential that is within them is not apparent, And of course, there are many other, let's say, themes that are woven into, and sometimes in quite a powerful way, into the Lord of the Rings, which may also be overlooked. For instance, I noticed, particularly because of my historical studies and the monarchist tradition of my family, that beginning with the Hobbit already, there is always the theme of the once and future king. A very with the dwarves, it's the king under the mountain, and Durin in the Lord of Moria, and so forth. But it is always there that the king is sleeping under the mountain. Durin's shape appears in the mind out of the lake at Moria, but it's always the king will come back again. The king under the mountain, the king of carven stone, the king of silver fountains will come into his own. And what is this? And it is not. And Tolkien was a monarchist, politically speaking, as he well might be in England, and which also is also interesting, he was not only a believing, but a very much practicing Catholic. He went to Mass every day of his adult life, unless he was traveling or sick. So he was very he had a very interesting spiritual life of his own, which is not generally mentioned. But this is also, of course, when you come sort of the Jungian interpretation of myths, that the king under the mountain, and Aragorn, the coming king, is what the spiritual self in the human,
right,
who has been obscured and buried, and reappears in history again and again, whether it's the legends about Frederick Barbarossa, whether the legends about Tsar Alexander I, and things like that. There is always the royal personage who has gone away, but who will come again.
Yes, yeah, and in guises that is similar to Sauron overlooking the Hobbit, in guises that are dimmed. You mentioned Aragorn. They wouldn't have thought of him as the king. He's the kind of beggar wanderer.
Strider, the long-legged walker in the heat. Who the heck is he?
Right.
But he is the true king.
Yeah, and I mean, another of these great themes that maybe it jumps out at me because we're in such uncertain times now, but it's this relationship to despair that kind of ties into what you were talking about, where this almost prophetic, the king sleeping under the mountain. But this, I'm particularly thinking of Aragorn when he says to Gandalf at one point, "I'm sorry, I was wrong to despair." And so it's this notion that the ultimate, in some sense, enemy is despair. At this is the way things will be, and that's such a powerful lesson for little moments in our lives, but ultimately our long lives. This notion of despair.
Our rational minds can only make certain conclusions, but there are developments taking place which are beyond the rational mind, and we have to trust that. Because if we only go by the conclusions of the rational mind, we are limiting ourselves to that, and for the most part, we're going to miss out on some very good things. I have experienced things of that sort in my own life. My uncle, my mother's oldest brother, committed suicide in 1944 when the Russians were coming to Budapest. And on the other hand, my father, who was wounded by Russian guns, about to be executed by it wasn't the KGB at that time, I think it was the NKVD, and so forth, and he was wounded with 3 bullets and managed to crawl away.
Wow.
He lived, and he lived another 15 years after that because he did not give up.
Wow.
He says, no, it's the end, my life is at an end, everything is taken away from me, I'm no longer anybody in society or anything, I might as well die. He said, no.
Yeah, he was, wow, that's why I was happy to talk with you, because not only have you read about the book and thought about it and experienced it deeply, but you've read it over so many settings in the sense of, and so I'm curious if you could speak a little about maybe how it's changed either overall or in specific scenes that may you've thought about differently over the age or the setting. You mentioned you were in Budapest and fled from the Soviets and then ended up in Europe for a while, then Los Angeles, and you were in LA for like the 60s and saw that huge Frodo revolution in the 60s where it was kind of a renaissance for Tolkien, one of the many we've seen. And you were a part of that, where he was a big movement with the counterculture movement of the 60s, and loved Frodo. And I'm just curious if you could...
Of course I use that in my interaction with people, because obviously with my experiences I was and I am and I always will be an anti-communist. But when the 60s started, getting politically awry, and these poor young people were reading Mao's red book, the greatest mass murder in known human history, the super Hitler. And I always told them, you know what, guys, let's talk about Tolkien. And as soon as we turned to Tolkien, the atmosphere changed, and it was really beautiful when you could do it. So I could see that Tolkien was a pacifying and a therapeutic agent. And by gum, we really need a Tolkienian revival now, because the psychological difficulties as the result of the various events nowadays, the virus and so forth, are very, very dire.
Right.
And perhaps an other revival of real interest in Tolkien would be a big help. At least it could be.
Yeah. Well, and I was thinking about all of the loss and unsettling we're feeling is, I was thinking a lot more about, as I was, getting ready to talk with you, about Gollum in this, that's another lesson. Each of these characters seems to be just a wisdom book in themselves about life. And when we're shard from so much we thought was precious, and that's double-edged, as Gollum knows very well, his precious.
Yes, the precious, yeah. Well, of course, the presence of evil in the Lord of the Rings is a very important factor in a whole great big subject of itself, because it goes way back in a very Gnostic fashion to early cosmic developments, when one of the creative archons, you might say, becomes evil. And then even Sauron is just his disciple, or Morgoth, and so forth. So there is the cosmic evil, but there is also this kind of petty, nasty, personal little evil that takes over Gollum. Gollum is not inspired by Sauron or by Morgoth. He is not an agent of cosmic evil, but just of the nasty little personal ambition and cruelty and things of that sort. Yet, interestingly enough, if it weren't for him, perhaps the ring would not be destroyed, because he falls into the volcano.
Right.
When as Gandalf has predicted, that he may still serve a useful purpose. Maybe not in those words, but way back in the early part, probably in the early part of the Fellowship, Gandalf says that to Frodo.
Right.
Frodo says, well, why didn't Bilbo kill the nasty creature? And Gandalf says, well, sometimes it's a good thing not to kill. Because he may serve a useful purpose yet, and he did.
Yeah, because Frodo said, I choose not to do what I was supposed to do. It's not the exact quote, but at the very edge of the lake of fire, he says, I just choose not to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, his faculties and his heroism was confused and was failing, but the cupidity, the greed of little Gollum, oh, precious, bites his finger off and falls. So even those things can serve a purpose, and often they do.
Yeah, and I feel like each time I read it, I think of the the characters. There's only two that aren't affected by the ring. You know, there's Bombadil and the name escapes me right now. Boromir, right? No, his brother. Who said
No,
he said I wouldn't pick up the ring if it was lying on the side of the road.
gosh, I'm trying to remember. Certainly, Bombadil is one
Yeah,
whom he doesn't affect.
yeah.
It's probably
He was the
probably
he was the steward of Gondor's second son. You know, who dies tragically.
yes, yes, the last steward. And I can't think of at the moment either. Oh, he was unaffected by the ring
Right,
also,
right. They were the
but
only two.
he was of course bamboozled by the Palantir,
Yeah,
by the Seeing Stone. So he believed that particular magic. Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
and
Oh
the
yes, but other than that, everybody was in some way or the other affected by the ring. Even Gandalf, he said he would turn into a sort of an evil wizard if
yeah.
he kept the ring, and the elfen queen Galadriel,
Mm-hmm.
I would become a dark queen wanting to rule the world. So even the highest and the wisest can be corrupted by some things.
Yeah, and you had mentioned. I mean, I started it off with all of this coming from this visionary experience, and I've heard you talk about this before about Tolkien's notion of secondary creativity,
Yeah.
about how that's part of the human task.
Yes, let me see now what we mean on the secondary creativity. Oh, that we can create things too.
Right.
Yeah. Oh yes. Uh-huh.
And how in that like some people charge that Tolkien's work is escapist, but his theory is that it actually brings you more into this world by experiencing something in the secondary creativity, in the imaginary. So you go through Lord of the Rings and you come out with clearer eyes for our life, not to hide from our life.
Oh yeah, I think that is absolutely true. Just because of that constant applicability.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's almost no part of the Lord of the Rings, or even of the Hobbit for that matter,
Right.
that doesn't have an applicability to various psychological situations and life situations of the individual. It directly speaks to us and to our activities and our problems and so forth. So it's a very, very unique literary creation. And perhaps this uniqueness itself is a proof that it came from a higher state of consciousness, that it is visionary writing.
Yeah, and I mean along those lines, I can't think of how many times I've returned mentally to just the notion of the wizard knocking on the door,
Oh yeah.
and that's when your life is you're called, and you're not called to necessarily something that's going to be smooth. And then similarly, the notion of stepping outside the Shire. I can't tell how many times in my life I've thought about how perfect those notions are to encourage you and
Oh
to
yeah.
avoid despair, and that's where growth and new knowledge and experience of all sorts of things happens when you go beyond the Shire of the world that you know. Are there passages or notions that kind of are always close to your mind as you think about the book or your life?
Well, I would say that after all, I started reading Tolkien actually beginning with The Hobbit.
Mm-hmm.
About well, let's see, when did the popular edition start coming out? 60. something or the other. So quite early after publication, I started reading, and then I kept reading until the present time. Actually, I'm a little bit reluctant at the present time to pick it up, because I think that that mythic world is so powerful that it may be in such conflict with what is going on outwardly now, because we are just really we are walking around the desolate valleys of Mordor. That's what we are doing right now. You know?
Yeah.
Land of ashes and misery. And the contrast might be so big that it would be a little bit too disturbing to my psyche. But I've been talking now for a couple of months, as in it's time to start reading The Lord of the Rings again, no matter what. But because things relate, again, that applicability, that relationship is so powerful and so automatically it's there, you know, that it has great effects on the psyche, even at the unconscious level. I know I talked to a lot of these youngsters. After all, I was already going into my 40s. You know that my 89th birthday is going to be the end of this month.
Wow. 89. That's incredible.
Yeah, if I had let my beard grow longer, I would look like Gandalf.
That's right.
but you know, in any event, the applicability is always there, and to each portion of it speaks to each aspect of your life and to each of your life stages if you are alert enough to catch it, and even at the unconscious level. A lot of the young people who were reading it in the 60s, you know, they couldn't tell you in any articulate fashion as to what they were getting out of it, except that it was a real turn-on. It was a real great book.
Yeah, well,
and it was, and it still is.
Yeah, and it is still a great yarn, a great tale. Just on that level.
Oh yeah.
I think
you remember that there's in one of the kind of books about Tolkien, there is a scene at Oxford of an electrician or somebody who comes into the building, I think after Tolkien's death, and there's a bust of Tolkien in the hallway. And the electrician walks up to the bust and pats it on the shoulder and says something that, "Well done, Professor, you wrote a wonderful yarn. Thank you."
Yeah, and I think he even had all of his tools named after Tolkien characters, if I remember correctly.
Oh yeah, that was also he was a real. And you know, people from all walks of life. I remember my first trip to Canada on a lecture to cross the border over by Vancouver, and I had several volumes of Lord of the Rings in my briefcase, and the Canadian customs officer opened it up and saw that. Oh, I said, "You're reading Tolkien." And then, as I was leaving, he was waving at me and he said, "Say hello to Bilbo." It's really something that sunk into people.
Yeah, and it's across time, it's across languages. There's some beautiful Russian editions of the Tolkien, and I met a couple who were reading it to each other before they went to bed, and just a few pages, and they were already halfway through. And there is this, maybe that's to do with the visionary aspect of it, but there is a call to participate in the work that, I mean, all great literature has, but in particular with the themes and the characters, that just, it is an encounter. It's not information. It's not distraction.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's going into another world, walking into another world. Whether it's the Shire to begin with, or maybe even outside of the Shire through the hedge into the old forest, you're going into another reality.
Yeah. So
absolutely.
And so you can see your own more clearly. And I was, of course, there's that famous poem where, with the line, all that is gold does not glitter, and not all
glitter, yes.
Yeah, and not all those who wander are lost. And I'm thinking,
this is the prophecy. It's the prophecy about the once and future king.
Right. And
but it's also that king is, of course, also inside of us.
Exactly. And this was going to be maybe my last question to you, although we could keep going for hours, is not all who wander are lost, but what about those who can't wander because we're stuck inside with, all these lockdowns and all this virus?
Well,
it's very interesting.
That of course is a problem, as you well know, and I think it's also one of the deeper reasons why these kinds of activities like the lockdown phenomenon should have been and should be looked at more closely and not applied so in such a facile and yet at the same time draconic manner by various governments, because the damage that they are doing to the psyches of people is immense. The death rate from the virus is relatively small, but the psychological damage being done by the lockdown is incredible.
Yeah,
and I can't understand how that there is. Where are the psychologists? Where are the psychoanalysts? Where are they all, for God's sakes, while this is going on? How come they turned everything over to the epidemiologists?
Yeah, and it certainly makes us think about not giving into despair. So maybe in terms of all that is gold does not glitter, we'll turn off the screens for a bit and open up Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, which
is absolutely that we have to turn to the deeper and the more inspiring and the more transformative things if we are going to be saved at all in terms of our sanity and otherwise. Otherwise, we are going to have a bunch of people physically walking around, but in their minds being dulled to a tremendous extent, as many are already, And so this is, it would be a great counterweight to what is
exactly
going on.
Yeah, and that's probably the best way to think about the offering that started from that strange little sentence from that word hobbit that Tolkien called Tolkien to a whole new world of worlds.
In a hole in the ground lives the hobbit.
Yeah, and this notion of the encountering the imaginal realm that, for me, even though I'm very happy in Izmir, but so separated from things that we thought we knew and people we love and just the daily life and you in a way you forget or you despair or even worse you forget about the gifts of the imaginal realm.
Yeah, a kind of, to use a terrible analogy, a kind of an iron curtain descends on the good things in your mind.
Yes.
And all you can think of, I'm locked in, I can't go out, I can't go to a movie, I can't go to a coffee shop, I can't meet my friends in Santa Monica or in Izmir, and it's terribly depressing.
Yeah, and so we need that move into that reminder of the encounter. Besides, I think all of the wisdom that's in the book, but just the experience of transformation.
It's an incredible. It's an opening into another world which is literally endless. All you have to do is read a little bit of the Silmarillion, and you see worlds after worlds, and aeons, and peoples, and elves, and it just goes on and on and on. It's a whole endless reality
that we can experience and apply
that we
directly.
Can experience.
Yeah.
We can step in there and we can assimilate as much of it as we are able at the time.
Well, before we go, do you want to leave us with one of your favorite scenes out of that 1,000-page Lord of the Rings?
Mm-hmm. Well, I would say the Return of the King is a practical and archetypal task that we need to wake up the king under the mountain, or we need to see Strider turn into Aragorn, because then we will have direction, we will have heroism, we will have the fortitude to endure.
Well, that's well said, and we can reflect. And I love the writing of that scene when he leaps off of the boat after he's brought the ship after he's brought the dead from under the mountain, and he comes off, and he is really transformed, and he has to go through that journey through the mountain of the dead. It's very, very powerful. I think the more I read Tolkien, I appreciate his writing. I think.
This is of course where he meets the spirits of the Oathbreakers.
Yes.
That's awesome and terrifying scenes.
Yeah,
really.
and so many scenes we could just shout back and forth over across the world with this technology. But I thank you so much for invigorating my lockdown and having this discussion about the Lord of the Rings. I've always appreciated your lectures on it, and I think I'm going to reread it again. I mean, I was like you. Well, I don't know if I could handle it during lockdown, but I think I have to. I think it's time.
When all is said and done, it might do us some good.
Yes, yeah. This may be the wizard knocking on the door to take the book off.
It could well be.
Yeah, and
letting smoke rings come forth from his pipe.
Right, and disrupting our.
Listen, thank you so very much, and we certainly look forward to the end of this balderdash, and maybe we'll still meet in person in this life.
Yes. So
all the best to you, and we pray for you and for your beloved that things will work out after all, and that the king and the queen of alchemy can get together.
Well, that would be a whole other discussion, though. We would have to have.
Right.
Yeah. Well, so thank you again, Dr. Hoeller, for this wonderful time.
And I really enjoyed this.
Yeah, it was wonderful to have your thoughts, and we have the description below that links to the gnosis.org website, and there are some of the lectures available, I think, even on Tolkien series.
All kinds of stuff.
Yeah, and there's others that have just shown up on YouTube, so I appreciate it, and I'm going to have to pull that tomb off of the shelf. And if you're new to the channel, again, please remember to subscribe and share the video with friends if you like. And thank you again, and be safe in Los Angeles, Dr. Hoeller.
Thank you so very much.